Okay, good morning and a very warm welcome to this innovation workshop, part of the Genesis 2021 conference. My name is Alicia Gallier. I'm Business Development Manager at One Nucleus and delighted to be welcoming you to the session this morning. So the topic for this innovation workshop is the impact of the COVID pandemic on healthcare innovation, hosted by Cambridge Wireless. So in this session, we're going to hear some insightful observations into healthcare innovation post-COVID, commentary on the progression of the diagnostics that were developed and how they can impact future health security, and also a look into the adoption of other digital technologies. We're very lucky. We have an extremely esteemed panel of speakers lined up, and I'll very shortly hand to Nigel Whittle, who is the Cambridge Wireless Healthcare SIG champion and also VP of Medical and Healthcare at Plextech. So just before I hand to Nigel, just a few words on logistics. If you're not speaking, if you'd kindly remain muted, that'd be much appreciated, and with cameras off. As you will have heard, the session is being recorded, so it can be featured as part of the on-demand content for the conference as well. And the chat box has been enabled. We've tested it, it's working. So if throughout the session you would like to contribute any questions or comments, or if you'd like to introduce yourself, don't be shy. We'd like it to be an interactive session. So please feel free to drop those in there, and I'll be in the background to hand those to Nigel. And we've also got Peter Ferguson, also part of the Healthcare SIG and Director of Healthcare Technologies at ARM, who will be helping to moderate the session as well. So I hesitate, I don't want to take up any more of the time, and I'm now going to hand to Nigel to have the Zoom stage. So Nigel, shall I start sharing the slides?
Yes, please, that'd be great.
Stuff. Okay. Is that all good?
Yeah, can you put them on landscape? Or that's it. Lovely, thank you.
Lovely, thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alicia, for that introduction. I thought it'd be useful to give a very quick introduction to Cambridge Wireless before we go on to the meat of the seminar session. So first of all, let me introduce myself. Next slide, please. So my name is Nigel Whittle. I've been working at Plextech for the last 4 or 5 years as head of medical and healthcare. And I'm also one of the healthcare SIG champions working with Cambridge Wireless. And I've been working with Cambridge Wireless also for the last 4 or 5 years. So I come from a background very much of biotechnology, but having moved into the medical device sector over the last 10 years, yes. So very much sort of feel I have a foot in both camps. I'm very interested in some of the innovations that can be brought through from both the biotech and the medical device sector. So next slide, please. So Cambridge Wireless is and I'm sure many of you are aware of the organization, it's a not-for-profit membership organization. And the intention is very much to build collaboration between different organizations within the group. Also about learning and growing the network and the companies. And it's very much even despite the name being Cambridge Wireless, it's very much a national organization. And about 70% of the companies are in fact based outside of Cambridge, although organizations still starting. And in fact, about 13% of the companies are international, and there are at least 17 countries with membership through Cambridge Wireless. So it's a very effective organization for building networks both nationally and internationally. Next slide, please. So the community of Cambridge Wireless is very active across the whole technology ecosystem, ranging from everything to some of the big software giant companies such as Microsoft and Amazon, equipment manufacturers. There's a lot of rattling in the background. Okay, thanks. But yeah, perhaps you could turn your speaker off if you're not speaking. Yeah, so range from lots of different types of organizations, some of the very large organizations based in Cambridge in the UK, some device developers, manufacturers, and a whole range of different organizations. I do notice that FlexTech is not on that list, but I think we're on the next slide. On the next slide. Yeah, there we are. So yeah, so the Cambridge Wireless community been going for more than 10 years now, and many of the organisations have been working very closely with Cambridge Wireless over that period of time. And you can see in that slide a snapshot of some of the many organisations. Next slide, please. So one of the kind of the key activities that Cambridge Wireless does is to organise special interest groups, and these are the real backbone of Cambridge Wireless. And there are a whole range of different special interest groups, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide there. Everything from artificial intelligence to automotive and transport, industrial automation. I'm guessing most of you, of course, are interested in the medical healthcare of the healthcare group within Cambridge Wireless. So the remit of these special interest groups is very much sort of focused on specific technology and market sectors. We try and keep our members up to date for a whole range of different activities, seminars and workshops, that's the most important. And then through those, try and create some very useful opportunities for influencing develops, exploring new business opportunities, and throughout the whole organisation encourage a strong element of networking. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the members of the healthcare group, healthcare special interest group. There's Layla, Sidi, Paul, Peter, and myself. I think we may all be on the call today, hopefully. And the mission of the healthcare group is very much to connect people and organisations who have that particular interest in the healthcare technology, and put them in touch with organisations that can provide solutions or have an active ongoing interest in other aspects of the whole Cambridge Wireless community. So a very strong interest in all aspects of medical and healthcare, particularly, I guess, around sort of digital health, given the nature of the special interest group. But certainly very keen to try and build links across other members of Cambridge Wireless. Okay, next slide, please. So finally, I'd like to thank our partner, One Nucleus. Thank you, Alicia. So One Nucleus, and I've been involved with One Nucleus myself for a long time. It was established in 1997 as a not-for-profit life science healthcare group. Again, the networking and membership organisation, initially very much focused on Cambridge, but now focused down around London and Cambridge and that corridor, headquartered in Cambridge. And again, really sort of trying to build on the expertise that the UK and the knowledge the UK has in life science and healthcare, and trying to support organisations and companies working in that sector through a whole series of different activities. Again, very much sort of focusing on networking and trying to build relations and interaction between the different organisations. So I think with that, we will now go on to the event itself. Next slide, please. So this event today is very much about the impact of the COVID pandemic on innovation in healthcare. And the remit for the innovation workshop is really driven by the concept that COVID-19 has been perhaps the most disruptive pandemic of this century, certainly in terms of its impact on a very integrated and close-knit society, and also therefore on the healthcare systems. So that crisis has caused sort of very dramatic economic disruption, but has also led some, we believe, very positive and significant innovation as a way to sort of to address many of the concerns caused by the pandemic. And this, we hope, has resulted in some major advances in the delivery of healthcare. So, for example, we're seeing very rapid developments in things such as telecare and telehealth in the UK. There have been improvements in the development of innovative technologies for the development of vaccines, and the fact that they also bring out vaccines and have people injected within 12 months of the start of the pandemic has been a fantastic achievement we're very aware of. And also the role of sort of central government has been very different, how it might normally have worked in other either economic situations or other healthcare environments. So the ability to deliver vaccination programs across this swathe of the National Health Service has been fantastic. But clearly, the COVID pandemics required solutions that can be nationally scaled. And many of those solutions have been based around digital health technology. And of course, a lot of these technologies were perhaps originally in development before the COVID-19 pandemic came along. But certainly the pandemic, we think, has really stimulated the response and increased the urgency of response, requiring a sort of dramatic speeding up in the rollout of these technologies. So this has caused a significant change already in the whole healthcare environment, and we believe that the driver will be structural engineering in healthcare, COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, I'll pass over to Duncan to hear your talk.
Thanks, Nigel. Let me go through the digital hiccup we all face, trying to share the right screen. So hopefully that's working.
That looks great, yeah.
Does that look good? Okay. Huge number of resonances from James's talk, which I'll pick up as we go. But yeah, as Nigel said in the introduction, I'm a bit of an imposter. I'm not sure how much innovation I'm going to talk about here, but what I'm going to be really discussing is how we've been using some of our industrial engineering ideas and tools and methods over the last couple of years. And I was just pondering, if you told me 2 years ago that I'd be at this event, I would have been really rather surprised, as you'll see as we go through. So first point to make is I'm going to be talking about some of our experiences over the last 18 months. And there's a lot of people to mention, particularly from the Institute of Manufacturing here in Cambridge, but medical colleagues within the university and at the local hospitals, and quite a lot of other people. So I can't name them, so I'm just listing them there. So the other thing to say is, the Institute for Manufacturing here in Cambridge has actually had a long history of working in healthcare. But the interesting thing is that until about 2 years ago, almost all our work was in the first 3 zones, starting from the left. And really everything I'm going to be talking about is in the right-hand side. So, it's very much, it's been new territory for us, but there's a history of healthcare support from a manufacturing perspective. So my background is, I've as Nigel said in the introduction, I've worked in manufacturing automation for a long time. And as James mentioned, worked with a lot of new technologies over the years, many of which have never seen the light of day in industrial usage. A lot of my work, however, has been around resilience of industrial operations and how technologies help with that. And I'll come back to that because that's been a theme in our work. Did a lot of work with logistics, very large logistics companies, don't need to name them. And the most recent piece of work, which picks up a thread that James mentioned, but also the Robert McKinnon raised in his comment. We've been focusing a lot on very low cost, actually low tech digital solutions in manufacturing over the last couple of years. So the work that we've been involved in for really, I guess, since last March has been in 3 core domains. And as I said, if even back to February 2020, my involvement in a lot of the sort of the hands-on side of healthcare was very limited. But we've been involved in 3 areas. One, working with local hospitals and very much in a hands-on emergency response mode, starting back in March 2020. And really, it was a very short period of time that I would say that activity ran for. Secondly, there's been a need to support ongoing day-to-day life during the pandemic. And that's been something that we've had a significant input into. And again, some of this isn't even research. This is, to a certain extent, we're deploying some of our research ideas in relatively practical situations. And then probably the most lasting activity is around post-pandemic recovery. And that the time zones on the right-hand side there just give you a sense of the sort of, this is not the sort of time periods that research programs run for. This is the sort of time periods that, you know, people working in very near-term engineering, perhaps environments would work towards. But I think if I was asked what have been the innovations associated with our work so far, it's been kind of around time compression and adaptation of some of the skills and techniques we have. So I'll begin with the emergency response. First, yeah, I should just mention tools and techniques. The sort of things we've used are actually really basic elements, and you know, there's not really a mention of machine learning or of AI or of blockchain or anything, any new technologies at all in anything we've done. We've basically used old technologies in new ways, which has been a kind of interesting and refreshing experience. So if I just go back to start with the pandemic emergency response, what you can see there is actually my bedroom cupboard back in late March 2020, where we, through a couple of phone calls with the local hospitals, we found not only to try to find out, is there something we could do? We found out there were a lot of things we could do to help. And actually the only problem was everything was needed reasonably quickly. And some of it might not be needed at all. So, you know, as our department dispersed to, everyone went to their bedrooms, their houses, etc., we kind of set up a game plan to see what we could do and to actually work out what we couldn't do, which was equally important at the time. So I'm just going to talk through some of the things we did at that point. So one of the things we identified really early on was that the hospitals were pretty good at understanding admissions and actually the relationship between COVID in the community and admissions cycles. But actually one of the issues that was harder to understand was the impact on the hospital resources. So we did a lot of work using some of the industrial engineering simulation tools we've actually worked with for many years to actually provide the hospital with a resource predictor. And that then went on to be used. My colleague Ajit Parlikar did a lot of work with this, and it's now used in understanding the different patient flow routings and the different allocation of wards to COVID and non-COVID activities. In another extreme, suddenly there were a whole lot of donations of PPE coming from all sorts of random places. And so we developed an approach to build pop-up warehouses and using some simple software and some QR codes, we actually started building warehouses all over the place in Cambridge to actually start to gather together PPE that was being donated when we couldn't get, particularly when we weren't able to gather it through the mainstream NHS pathways. So literally a warehouse put together in 2 days. A third response, and this comes back to James's comment, a lot of work around ventilators. We looked at that and thought, well, actually, why would we try to get into ventilators when everyone else is much more capable of doing that sort of thing? But one area that we identified as being possible, not necessarily a definite use, was that if there weren't enough ventilators, then a mechanism which would allow a controllable means of splitting a ventilator to be used by 2 people might be worthwhile. And we actually used a lot of our low-cost solution ideas in this development. It was developed purely as an emergency tool when there was nothing else available. And in fact, it wasn't actually used in anger, but the systems developed and working very effectively, actually. Equally, one of the actual main issues the hospitals had was the loss of staff, and not only through illness, but through isolation, and actually the pathways to understanding who might be available on a given day was really complicated. So we got very heavily involved in building a system for estimating who was going to be available at a given time to meet priority staffing needs. And actually that solution, the final solution, was never used, but a whole lot of our interim solutions were. So then I'm going to move on now so that's the hospital. And as I said, that finished very quickly. You know, the emergency bit was 6 months, and to be honest, we couldn't have supported it for much longer than that. Then the next piece was supporting day-to-day life, another deployment of the my bedroom cupboard. But in about August in 2020, we were also, a number of us were called in to look at the logistics for setting up a PCR testing program within the university. And it was particularly novel because we were doing pooled PCR, which meant 8 to 10 students were putting their swabs into a single test tube for testing, because we only had a very limited allocation for test capacity. And so actually we had to build a factory to build test kits, because there wasn't such a thing as a 10-person PCR test kit. There still isn't, I don't think. So actually we used some of our ideas on pop-up warehouses. We built a mini factory in the space of 2 weeks, and we're producing test kits within 3 weeks. And as we set that up to be distributed around the university, where we had 50 drop points where people had to pick up tests to do their own testing and then be collected again, we actually used some of our tools and techniques for tracking test kits and actually the containers of test kits. And we're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 a week being distributed. And then on another day-to-day life issue, and this comes back to the Robert McKinnon question. You know, in the very early 2021, we started to move with staff using lateral flow tests. And what we wanted to do is a way of systematically gathering staff data and understanding who, you know, where potential outbreaks were in terms of staff, as well as our student monitoring program. And we built this app within under a week, and as of today, it still hasn't got approval, and it doesn't need approval actually anymore, because there's other commercial solutions available. But it was an eye-opener to find how many hurdles there were, just as we found with the ventilator splitter system, how many hurdles there were in getting something like this approved. The ventilator splitter system we'd anticipated. This one we were slightly taken aback by the level of complexity. And then a very minor thing, you know, actually our residential colleges were actually in a very complex set of states. So because they didn't understand what the impact of students in illness and self-isolation would be, matched with their staff shortages. So we deployed some of our, you know, some basic industrial engineering tools to look at the effect of the pandemic on the ability to cater. And then finally, just post-pandemic recovery, we've done a number of things around supporting companies to be more hands-free, using some of these low-cost ideas I mentioned earlier. And then we continue our relationship with the hospital. And so, you know, work we're doing on simple deployments, and I think this comes back to James' point earlier. You know, actually, there's lots of very simple things. Actually, they're about hospital efficiency rather than patient health often, and therefore they might want to be considered separately in terms of regulation. But, you know, solutions like locating equipment around a hospital, monitoring fridges which have drugs in them, or actually just doing some industrial engineering around the point of care testing as patients arrive in the hospital. So all sorts of activities that continue with our relationships with the hospital, which have begun and I think was cemented to the future now. So if I now, I've got the same frozen last slide problem that James had. Yeah, so just to finish, you know, from my point of view, there's a huge number of opportunities for existing industrial engineering and ICT tools in healthcare. We've found some opportunities to fast track simple solutions into use. Others we've hit barriers. But actually one of the fantastic things has been an unprecedented end user feedback during the process. And all the challenges on the right-hand side, well, I think I've mentioned them already, you know, speed of response, sometimes we just couldn't manage it. Life criticality of our applications was really important, and we do understand that. The regulatory restrictions difficult, and actually another issue is the limited ICT capabilities within the healthcare domain, say compared to the industrial domain, where you'd expect a manufacturing organisation to have ICT capabilities in-house. It's much more limited in healthcare. But just the final point, you know, from our point of view, you know, we've developed lasting relationships between our local healthcare providers, in fact, not just local, but, you know, national healthcare providers, and engineering, which I think, you know, will go into the future, and hopefully we'll be able to actually take advantage of a number of the pathways for innovation that we've developed during this last 18 months. Thank you very much.
interesting talk and some very insightful observations about how engineering technologies can be applied to the healthcare arena. So again, we've got some time for questions. So if anybody has any particular questions they'd like to ask, I guess raising their hand would be the best way to do that. And again, while that process is going on, but perhaps I could sort of ask you a sort of question about the ventilator challenge. And I suppose my question is, what learning lessons are there from that? And one of the interesting things we have found in working for a technical consultancy is we were approached by many people, individuals, small organizations who had kind of some great ideas, or thought they had great ideas that they would like to see implemented. But actually the kind of the practicalities of it, or the regulatory aspects of it, or the medical aspects meant that they couldn't move forwards. And I think the ventilator challenge had an element of that. Certainly I know from my ex-colleagues at Sagentia, that most of the ventilators they made ended up in a landfill site. Now, whether that was the sort of technical issues or not, I don't know. But do you have any sort of comments about how one sort of translates that sort of perceived need to real activities and real things?
Yeah, so I mean, so as I said, we kind of avoided the issue on the ventilator challenge because we were asked by quite a number of our collaborators on the digital manufacturing on a shoestring program, should we get involved? And we looked at it and we talked to the local hospitals and also local companies that are already involved in the ventilator challenge area, and this was like within days. And we just concluded that at best, we'd be better off helping other organisations that were trying to develop ventilators. So therefore, we went down this pathway, having discussed with a number of the anaesthetists at a local hospital, said, actually, the problem is we may not get those ventilators in time. Is there something that could be put together that would simply sit there in an emergency response? And actually, New York was one of the challenge areas that this arose out of, because they actually ran out of ventilators in New York. And so that was what we focused on, and we focused on getting something together very quickly, and we knew that it would only get emergency regulatory support if it was needed in an emergency. So if I look back at the ventilator challenge, to me, I mean, it's a great thing. It pulled a lot of people together to work on enthusiastically, but I do wonder whether a competition was the best use of resources at the time, when there were potentially dozens of things that might have been put out into competitions. And that one just seemed crisis-like at that stage. And, I don't know, I have colleagues here that have looked at the ventilator challenge in great detail, and they would have a more learned view on it than I do, really. But my sense is competitions aren't always the best pathway. You could identify 3 or 4 organisations with most of the capabilities and just ask them to get involved.
Yeah, I think that was our general experience as well, actually, but thank you. I do know Simon Walker, you've got your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Hi there. Thank you very much, Duncan, for the presentation. I'm intrigued with the speed with which silos were kind of removed. And perhaps now they're coming up a little bit again, or becoming real again. I just wondered, what are your thoughts on, keeping the silos down? And also, the second thing is your insight that you made an app for the results, and it took you a couple of weeks, I think, to make it, and it's still not approved. So the regulatory challenge of being agile and fast enough. What are your thoughts on those 2 points, please?
Yeah, so the silos one, I mean, personally, I have to confess, I like shortcuts anyway. And so, at the two silo areas that we dealt with really quickly was, firstly, working with the hospitals. We actually just verbally agreed there was an umbrella agreement anyway in place, but we just agreed that we would sort everything out as we went. And we were talking to people every day, literally having a hospital meeting every day on a regular basis, and a list of items were generated, and and we just worked our way through them so quickly. So it was an extraordinary thing. In terms of the testing program, so we were given, I think we had 4 to 5 weeks notice that we were going to be starting to test 16,000 students. And if we tried to use the university system as it normally is, we wouldn't have made it. And so we just literally bought everything, paid for everything. Various people helped cut corners, and we had people recruited in a week and a half, a facility set up in 2 weeks. And so, there was a fair bit to unbundle at the other end when, where did all the money end up? We did sort that out. But I think that was great. And, there isn't, under emergency circumstances, you have to do these things. But I think some of those are still in place. The ability to get people together for a meeting, which would have been really difficult in the past where that happens. But now, for example, doing hospital projects, we are, my students go to the hospital, they will at times be held up, they can't get to people, whereas in the past, a year ago, everything was an emergency and therefore we got immediate access. So we are dealing with that. And as I mentioned earlier, actually one of the challenges we've got is dealing with hospital IT. And that really is quite, it's quite challenging because, I'm used to working with companies who have a lot of IT capabilities. Hospitals have a limited IT capability, particularly for innovation. So I think there are lots of lessons there, and we're hoping we can keep them all going. But I think we have to accept that we won't keep everything going there. In terms of the app, I would say we went hard at it for 2 months, and actually the need from our local point of view disappeared, and we were trying to support the Liverpool region in some trials they wanted to run, and so actually the barrier we hit is that in order for us to get through all the regulatory stages, we had to test our app on a data set of 5,000 photos, and it was actually getting regulatory access to that data set is what really just ground us into the dust. And actually it turned out by that point, the people I pulled off another project, I needed to put them back onto the project. So, I think you could look at that and say, why did that take so long? But it is what it was, and actually everybody we were dealing with was trying to do 100 things at once.
Thank you.
Duncan, great. Thank you very much indeed. I've been reminded that we are running slightly behind time. So thank you once again, Duncan, and we'll move on to the next speaker. And in fact, at this point, I'm going to hand over to Peter Ferguson, to introduce our next speaker. Peter, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Ferguson. I work in ARM, and my responsibility is healthcare technology. Today, I have the pleasure in introducing Keiko from TTP, who will talk to you about CoTest, which is a new pooled screening technology for COVID. In the course of developing CoTest, TTP discussed with ARM the needs for adding connectivity, and ARM was able to bring together a collaboration with another ARM partner called L2S2, who were at the time developing a fast, simple solution to the complex problem of medical device connectivity, something that we've heard already today. The platform from L2S2, which is a class of managed medical device cloud, delivers an off-the-shelf solution that enables smart, safe, and secure digital communication from the devices directly into the healthcare services. Indeed, some of the problems that we've heard, they overcome out of the box as such. Keiko is a life science consultant in the diagnostic group at TTP, which is an independent technology and product development company. Keiko leads the development of CoTest, a new pooled screening technology. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, Keiko has also been leading the biology development of point-of-care diagnostic devices. Prior to joining TTP, Keiko carried out research in biosensor development, molecular cell oncology at the University of Cambridge, and also biochemistry at the University of Oxford. So I'm looking forward to this presentation from Keiko. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for having me here. And let me share my screen. can you see the title page, Diagnostics as Defense? Great. So today I'd like to share with you TTP's new pooled screening technology for COVID testing and how this diagnostic solution could help us take greater control over our health security monitoring. So, and also, as Peter mentioned, adding connectivity from an early stage in development can add some significant benefits to medical device development. Just trying to move on to the next slide. Yeah, so to begin with, a brief introduction to who we are. So at TTP, the technology partnership, we help companies develop products around the world. And we have 30 years of history of successful, fast technology development. This is achieved through interdisciplinary thinking and approaches. And we have a dedicated diagnostic group led by Giles Sanders, and we have focused on developing diagnostic systems, and would like to talk some of the solutions today. So through the pandemic, we have many developments at TTP. And as the pandemic progressed, we looked at unique solutions together with our partners. There are many platforms that are already in use in COVID-19 testing, and some of which have adopted existing technologies. For example, this DNA nudge technology, which is a consumer DNA testing device. And we have adopted this to COVID testing, and now provided cartridges for hospital trials. And also we responded to the ventilator challenge. Covent we developed Covent, and we rapidly responded to ventilator call in a matter of weeks. And this one on the right, we also turned existing internal development into a handheld point of care consumer COVID testing device, which led to fast product launch in less than 10 months. This was an exciting fast-paced project to work on. But today I'm here to talk to you about CoTest. So what is CoTest? So CoTest is a pooled saliva COVID testing platform where a large number of people tested rapidly at low cost at point of need. So you don't have to go anywhere. And as the pandemic progressed, we realized that we need to carry on with our businesses and everyday lives and with education. And the need for actionable testing where the risk of transmission is the highest became stronger and stronger. And this is why we started to develop CoTest, which is now in prototype stage. Our aim is for simpler use, low cost, and less horrible test, enabling simpler everyday use. And we're targeting saliva. Although it's not exclusively for saliva, it can be for other samples, and also targeting pools, which allows lower cost per test, but at point of need. So how is CoTest different from other testing solutions? So we designed to enable rapid routine disease screening of large cohort at point of need. We have ease of use in mind. So something that's simple, intuitive and reliable and usable every day. So with lateral flow, sensitivity varies widely depending on how the sample is taken. Personally, when I put the swab up myself or my children, I'm never quite sure whether I've done it quite, I've put it down quite far enough or done it correctly until I get that results back on your phone. And every time I get the stick out, my family members start running away from me and refusing as long as they can in a rush hour morning. But with CoTest, it's a non-invasive consistent sample collection. And we also have ease of operation in mind, no expertise required, no lab training required to operate this. And at the end, you get an actionable outcome at the point of need. So the user needs to press the cartridge in after inserting the samples into the cartridge and press that back into the instrument and press go. So an example of a setting that we have in mind is a classroom. So say in schools where the whole class will be tested all at once, we have the cartridge and swabs are unpacked. The individual swabs are handed out. These are placed in people's mouths under the tongue for about a minute, and these are placed back into the cartridge. And the operator, typically a teacher, would place the cap back and insert it into co-test instrument and press go. And within an hour before your next class starts, you get your results. And when you get your negative results, you're safe to mix with another year group, for example. So in this setting, you don't need to order tests or post them and wait for it to be processed in the central lab for a day or so. And we co-test within an hour, you know, anyone in the group has COVID. So this is the workplace, the school setting where frequent rescreening takes place with your group of people. And if you get negative pool results, then you know that you have the confidence to carry on in safety. If you get a positive result, you know that at least one person in the group has likely to have COVID. So at that point, the bubble isolates and have your priority individual sample testing done, sent off to central lab. And those who's been tested positive from that can quarantine, and the rest can go back to your work school settings. So this boosts stronger confidence in self-security. And in this way, if we had this in place, the recent high rates of transmission from places of education, I think, could have been largely limited. And this type of rapid screening of large cohorts is particularly effective screening method when the infection rate is low. One of the common concerns about pool testing of what's available is dilution of samples. So for example, if there is one positive case in your class of 30, that means the more sample you have, the more your viral sample is being diluted in a large volume. But with what's different about co-test and its enabling technology is that your samples are being concentrated, so that it takes entire sample from individuals. Everything is pulled together without discarding anything, which is unlike the typical sampling where you take a subsection of sample. So you take the whole sample and end up concentrating it. And this achieves a high sensitivity. And another enabling technology that achieves really high sensitivity is we use molecular testing, which means that you amplify viral RNA and you get a high signal. And the readout at the moment is a simple yellow or pink. It's a color readout based on LAMP and technology. But this can be, we have adaptability in mind. This can be adapted to standard PCR methods. And another key important feature of co-test is connectivity, as Peter mentioned. And also, as Duncan mentioned earlier about approval, building a medically sound healthcare device is complex. And then we need to meet very stringent medical regulatory standards. So we were introduced by to Philip Gaffney and his team at LCOS2, based in Cambridge. And this collaboration was enabled by ARM, which led to integration of L2S2's Managed Medical Device Cloud, this MMDC. And what it means to have a connected device is that cloud-enabled system allows integration to medical data. So MMDC is a medically compliant data and analytics platform, allowing results to be managed meeting regulatory requirements. So adding connectivity and medically compliant documentation, that means medical certification from day one in development, can lead to really acceleration of development by being ready for regulatory submission, which could take months out of development time, which is extremely valuable. And cloud-enabled system could also allow monitoring of live epidemiological feedback, providing live feeds of geographical hotspots to healthcare providers. And this is where we see the future, which would really greatly help us knowing what type of tests and what action that needs to be taken. And we envisage co-tests being deployed in a number of points of need testing, including transport, so airplane and ships, for example. Example of the setting is that the system starts by registering the patient using the phone or tablet. The information about who is taking the test is sent back to the cloud. And when the test is ready to be taken, when you collected all your samples, the start instruction can be sent from the cloud to the co-test, or the user can start the instruction and press go. And when the tests are up, when it's ready, the results are sent back to the cloud. And these are immediately returned to the user's phone or tablet to allow the cohorts to continue in schools or workplace or cleared to fly. And the negative results are securely associated with patients' records, the medical records. And health authorities report on geographical distribution of positive tests. So with our co-test prototype with L2S2, we've demonstrated that extraction protocol can be run automated from the cloud. With the L2S2 connected co-test prototype to the MMDC and set it up ready to deliver secure medical grade information data to healthcare providers. And recently we did a nice demo together with ARM where co-test initiated remotely from Italy, the person who was working from home from Italy in L2S2. And we performed a lab protocol extraction to the last step. And we were able to see that all happening in our lab here at TTP. And then we generated simulation of the type of data we expected to collect. So where do we see things are going from here? So we see that for continued health security, it will rely heavily on mass screening and isolation of asymptomatic spreaders. So the vaccine has been great at getting people out of hospital, but it's been shown that people can still get COVID and can spread infection, or you remain asymptomatic, but you can be infectious. So the vaccine status is not what we thought it would be when it was first rolled out. So also thinking long term, it's not just for COVID, but for designed for any disease screening, infectious disease screening with and we have adaptable features. And we also have similarly different strains in mind, different variants in mind, which is very relevant right now. Co-test can adapt which variants are more prevalent, can adapt with its biology and detect which variants are more prevalent in which areas. So this is because this is allowed, this adaptability comes with the molecular detection system. And co-test is still in development. It's in its prototype stage at the moment. And we're seeking funding and partnerships so that we can dramatically accelerate the rest of the development and get the machine co-test out in use. So please get in touch if you'd like to talk more. And I'll end here with a picture of the team. And thank you very much.
Thank you, KK. So we've got time for a few questions and answers. I've got a few come in already, KK, so I'm going to start with that. But if anybody has a question that's online, just raise your hand or go off mute. We can do that. So I'm going to start off, KK, with a question. I know you've presented today that actually you've gone from a phase where adding connectivity was being seen as a burden to actually it being a lot easier than you thought, and it even having benefit during the development of the science. So besides adding connectivity, are there any other features that have helped fast development time for medical devices like this?
So we had at the very start of the development, we had at the forefront of our minds that for it to be a fast development, we had to think during the initial design phase. We had different ideas, but it needs to be something that all the materials that we use should be readily available. So we had it really fancy designs that would make the instrument very compact, but what we needed for a fast rollout and also for adaptability, for thinking about manufacturing different places, different locations in the world, and also thinking about the supply chain, we made use of what's already available off-the-shelf material as much as possible. So as little bespoke material as possible, I still make it work and make it efficient in running. And that goes for both components of the instruments, but also for biological reagents. At the very start of the pandemic, we had the problem of the samples or the COVID testing cannot be processed because there were reagents not being available and so on. So we did some testing using different off-the-shelf reagents. So not going for bespoke materials, but off-the-shelf materials used as reagents, but also to make sure that these are interchangeable. You could use one reagents from one manufacturer, but also other manufacturer can be used. And so we've written our protocol in a way that it takes into account of these different, slightly difference in reagents.
I think it's inspiring how you're developing a piece of equipment that can actually be sent out into the field, and then even in the field it can be flexible to the different strains and diseases and as they come along. I think we've just got one more question because I know we're running late on time. Keiko, you mentioned that co-tests can be more reliable and accurate than lateral flow. How can you achieve such high sensitivity whilst you're testing so many individuals? I think maybe 50 individuals or something like that at a time. So
yeah.
how can you achieve such high sensitivity?
Yeah, it is quite counterintuitive if you think about it. You know, you're not just testing one person, but you're pooling samples from all different individuals. And actually, we've tested up to 50 saliva samples. So it's more than a typical class. So the reason why we can achieve such high sensitivity is that it's something really quite unique about our method, is that you use molecular methods and concentrating of your sample at the same time. And using molecular method means that you're not, unlike lateral flow, where it detects the protein antigen from the virus, you detect the viral material from your sample. So even though if you have a very, very small amount, if it's there, you can really amplify the genetic material, which means you can go really down in high in sensitivity.
That's inspiring, KK. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
I'm inspired by the chemistry and the concept you've come up with, but also how you've demonstrated that providing connectivity to your medical diagnostic device and connecting that into the healthcare industry perhaps isn't the burden that we all thought it was, and it can be solved by working across companies, as you've done with L2S2. Nigel, on that positive note, I'll hand back to you for a wrap up.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you all very much for those interesting presentations. I think we've had some very interesting talks about the frameworks around healthcare innovation, how some of the tools of industrial engineering can be involved in innovative process in healthcare, and a very good example there from Keiko on a very interesting piece of innovative technology. So thank you all very much. I'm very aware that we're somewhat overrun, so I don't propose to say any more words in terms of a wrap up, but just like to thank the speakers, James, Duncan and Keiko finally, and to thank all the participants as well for getting involved in this particular innovation workshop, and to thank both Cambridge Wireless and Genesis for providing this platform to talk about the, also one you as well, to talk about this particularly interesting area of work. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Alicia in case she has any final words to say.
Thank you very much indeed. So, yeah, special thanks to Nigel there for moderating throughout, and of course Peter at the end, and not forgetting James, Duncan and Keiko. Really insightful, interesting presentations. A real treat actually for everyone who logged into the session this morning. So thank you indeed for sharing your expertise there. And just to remind everyone, there's still plenty of on-demand content to be accessed via the app. And the next innovation workshop today is at 3 p.m. with Appleyard Lees, getting investment ready from an IP due diligence perspective. So a slightly different topic there, equally as valuable. So with that, everyone have a great lunch and hopefully see you online later. Take care all. Thanks. Bye.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.